Welcome back to 10-Minute Texts, a weekly show for Torah students on the go. Hello, and welcome back to 10-Minute Texts. This week, Parshat Pikudei. My father likes to joke that when you hear a speaker talking about the Parsha, talks about the first words of the Parsha, that maybe that's as far as they got in their learning. This week we're doing Parshat Pikudei, but I think maybe we're exempt from that, or maybe we don't quite fall into that category because, of course, Parshat Pikudei almost always comes along with Parshat Vayakhel, and it's only in this leap year that we get it separately on its own as Parshat Pikudei. And I think because of that, it's worth looking at the beginning, and it's worth trying to understand what is Parshat Pikudei. It's sometimes buried, it's sometimes lost because of its sibling. And here's our chance to give it its proper due. To understand the Parsha, we probably should understand that first word. What is the word Pikudei? What is the word pakad? It's a word that comes up in other contexts and throughout the Torah, and we're going to take a look at some of them. In modern Hebrew, a pekudah is a command. It's what an officer gives to a soldier in the army. But there are other connotations to the word, including gatherings, a mifkad, an accounting. It's a word that combines the ideas of specificity and precision and counting with the ideas of noticing, of taking account of something. And we see that here in our text, Ele Pikudei HaMishkan, Mishkan Haidut. These are the accounts of the tabernacle. The commentators explain that this is the accounting of all of the vessels of the tabernacle. So there's this specificity, there's this precision, there's this notion of counting. Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe, as they were rendered according to the commandment of Moshe. So we have both the counting and the command built in here, and even some of the remembering, that it's as Moshe remembered and then spoke about it. So a lot of those meanings are packed in just into this verse, which does repeat the word twice. Okay, I'd like to go back a little bit. I'd like to explore some of the other uses of the word pakad, because what we're noticing here is that it's this word that does something really powerful. It takes the ideas of specificity and precision and combines them with memory. Another way of saying that is that it introduces the idea of human will, of intentionality, to the physics of time and space, to the three dimensions of reality and that fourth dimension of time. We're bringing intention and human measurement and accounting, or not even necessarily human, also divine intentionality into the physics of the world. It's a powerful idea. Let's see where we've seen this word before and what are some of the other contexts it's been used in. Most famously, the first usage of the word is back in Bereshit, V'Hashem pakad et Sarah kasher amar, v'yas Hashem leSarah kasher diber. The Lord remembered Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. So here we have exactly what we expect, which is that connection of memory. The Lord remembered Sarah, and then doing. The Lord did unto Sarah. So again, that idea of intentionality and physics, the idea of memory, and then actually acting upon it. Now, what did God remember, and what did he do to her? So what God remembered is that he had promised to Avraham that Sarah would have a child, and precisely a year later, she has that child. So she becomes pregnant and she has a child. Again, that specificity of it's precisely at the exact same time, a year later, as per the promise. And this is really the beginning of the fulfillment of the promise of the Brit Ben Abtarim, the promise of the covenant of the parts, that Avraham would have children, and those children would become enslaved before being redeemed and returned to the land of Canaan. So pakad is the word that is used right at the moment that that promise becomes reality, starts to become reality, right in that liminal space, that moment of conversion, that tipping point between potential and actual. Okay, there's some other context that I'd like to look at as well. Part of this story, again, now we're up to Yosef, so we're fast forwarding quite a fair bit. to the end of Yosef's life and the beginning of slavery. So in the previous instance, we had seen Pakad at the beginning of the fulfillment of the promise of the covenant of the parts. There's another instance that I've skipped over, which is about Yosef being imprisoned, and that's really the beginning of his personal exile and redemption. But here we have Yosef dying, and he says to his brothers, Anochi meit, ve'Elohim pakod yifkod etchem, God will surely remember you, ve'hela etchem min haaretz hazot, and he's going to bring you out of this land as he promised. So Yosef calls back the promise, and then Yosef does another thing. He says, not only is this about memory, this is about the future, and not only is this about potential, but this is about actions. Vayashba Yosef et bnei Israel, in verse 25, he makes them take an oath, and the oath is, Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem, God will surely remember you, v'ha'alitem et atzmotai mizeh, and you shall carry up my bones from Egypt. Pakod yifkod, so we have it twice repeated in both of these verses and these two verses right after another. This is the heart, this is the key to the eventual success of Moshe. This is actually a secret code for knowing when redemption will arrive. Now I say this because when Moshe he's concerned that they won't believe him. And God has given him all kinds of signals and ways to authenticate himself. And God says to him, Lech v'asafta et ziknei Yisrael, gather them up, v'amarta alehem, Hashem Elokei avotechem nira elai, the God of your forefathers, and he gives him the code of Elohei Avraham, Yitzchak, ve'Yaakov, these three ancestors, and then he says, what's the passphrase? What's the words that are going to convince them that you're for real? Pakod pakadeti etchem, ve'et ha'asui lachem b'Mitzrayim. I have surely remembered you, and that which occurred to you in Egypt. And in fact, they do go along, and there's a great medrash that Serach bat Asher, one of the most long-lived Jews in the medrash, tells the Israelites that she remembers this secret code, this code of pei, of pakod yifkod, and that Moshe must be believed because he came with the words pakod pakadati. And Moshe completes the loop. Vaikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo, when the Israelites are being redeemed. Ki hashbeah hishbeah, he remembers the oath. So again, that connection between memory and action, these are the words of pakod. And it's quoted, Lemor pakod yifkod Elohim etchem v'halitem et atzmotai mizeh etchem. So Moshe turns the key using the words pakod yifkod, and then closes the loop, takes Yosef's bones out. Now, I've highlighted the text here. I apologize. Now we encounter our words again. And up until now, our context has been the promises of God to man, and the promises that man makes to man. God promises Avram that he'll be rescued. Yosef makes the Israelites promise based on that they'll take his bones out. And we see that in the future a lot also, that the word pakad is used around counting the Israelites, which is part of that fulfillment of this promise that they will be as numerous as the stars in the heavens or the sands on the beach, that they're being counted, and it's related back to that promise. It's the fulfillment of that promise. But here we have Pikudim used in a different way. We have Elef Pikudei HaMishkan Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe. So we have the accountings of the tabernacle, the accounts of the tabernacle don't seem to be a part of this. And then just a couple of verses later, we have the Chesef Pikudei Ha'edah, the silver that of the numbers of the congregation. In other words, the way they took the census was that each person gave a half shekel. We see this in 26. Beka lagulgolet, that is a half shekel per head. Lagulgolet is literally a skull. Each person would give a half shekel, and this way you could count how many Israelites they were. Lechol haver al hapkudim, every one of them who is numbered. And I want to suggest that there's a bridge being built here in the Mishkan. That the words Pikudim have largely been used to express God's actions in the world. God as a God of history, God as a fulfiller of promises, God taking notice of specific people and specific situations and fulfilling promises to them. But here we have something different. Here we have the Pikudei HaMishkan, the accounts of the tabernacle, connected with Pikudei HaEdah, connected with the numbering of the congregation. And the congregation numbers itself by giving money, which is then spent on the sacrifices brought in the Mishkan. So here what we see is a beautiful bridge of man doing the counting and the accounting, of man choosing to number himself and then converting those numbers into a promise unto God, into actions taken unto God, into giving to God, to the extent that sacrifices can be conceived that way, giving back to God. So man takes account of man's situation and reaches out to God through the word pikud. I think that for ourselves, this is a powerful idea, that we know that we live in the context of the promises and covenants that God has with our people. But it's up to us to translate our own commitments and to be specific about them, to account them, to notice and to remember them, whether you're talking about the role of specific ritual, or whether you're talking about holding yourself up and accounting for yourself as you might do at the end of every week, as you might do in your professional life, bringing that into the life of your relationship to God, and bringing that into the life of your relationship to a community. That's what Pikudim is all about. Thanks again for listening to 10-Minute Texts. Now it's your turn.